this was the kind of title that was kind of given to me, just to kind of give you a little bit of our scale. Slightly different challenges that we have at the advertising cloud because of the type of platform that we run. But we're actually really about 7 data centers. We're running across AWS. It is true, we kind of have 4 3/4 people working on this project. So it's definitely a challenge, and we have to be very pragmatic in regards to like how we go about running this infrastructure to be able to scale it, to be able to adapt to the pressures of cloud native. But it's something that has taught us a lot that I think, probably a lot of you here already are probably learning some of these journeys, trying to balance out some of the challenges as well. And so hopefully I can kind of give you some insights into, what's working for us. So just to kind of give a disclaimer, I'm going to be totally frank. If I had to say how I'm going to approach this, it's more of like if I could have went back into the past and give myself like some advice, this is kind of how I'm approaching today, just to kind of give you some, guidance in regards to maybe get you thinking, maybe looking at like maybe you're balancing out some of the challenges with containers, Kubernetes, machine learning, all these things that are really causing us to really rethink how we're building, how we're deploying, how we're observing things. And then as well as like the strategies that have kind of got us there. And there's the thing that I call cloud native FOMO, which I feel like there's good and bad with it. And so I'm just trying to help, provide some context there. And then like you bunch it, because this is here what we're for. And even when I was asked to join this event, I was at first kind of like masters, like, I don't know if I'm a master. And then I went and looked it up in the dictionary, and the dictionary said a master is someone that can use or control or dispose of something. And I'm like, well, yeah, definitely use Ubuntu. I think we do kind of control it, but sometimes we do get controlled when it's in a fleet. Things can happen, and we all know that kind of happens. And then as well as definitely we dispose of it. So I definitely fit that criteria, Stefan, so thank you for that invite. I agree, I'm a master here. So just to kind of give you some background on the advertising cloud, it's an interesting space. I was new to it, and some of the challenges that you see with these companies like Netscape, Netscape, that's how old I am. I'm talking Netflix, Facebook, all those FAANG companies. It's kind of interesting because we kind of have some slightly different kind of challenges that hit us, like packets per second. That's like the thing that just is the bane. Like anything on that edge, we just get pummeled because we are running like a stock exchange. So through the day, we just get billions of packets per second that's coming in constantly. And, excuse me, I think I hit them by accident. Yeah. So we get hit with these challenges, and yet we have these requirements that force us to be able to meet our customers' requirements. So one of the first ones that really has become a challenge is in regards to like latency. And like we have, qualities of services that we need to guarantee to our customers to know that when they go off and they're trying to make a bid, that they're hitting first off like the right segments, the right people they want to reach. And then as well as kind of like it's coming back in a real time that allow them to programmatically be able to make decisions that are going to help them really land in the right spots. And there's various channels that these things are happening. And the biggest thing that's really evolving is just in the areas of like programmatic television. That's become like a really huge space for us. And so, for us as SREs is really like how do we wrangle it? Because then, if you take that 50 milliseconds, then we have to think about what happens whether it's in public cloud, which we have some control over, data center, we obviously have to make some decisions there because that gives us a little bit more control so we can kind of figure out like, all right, we have these services that are talking to each other. How do we optimize? How do we make sure that we don't add anything additional if we can help it? So definitely that provides a really challenge for my team to be able to adapt and build that platform. The other area that, like we get is we have a lot of like object storage. These numbers that I'm quoting, they've changed. This was from a talk that I gave in 2017 that I think is when Stefan and them just joined, and I remember him talking to me about some of the things that Ubuntu was doing, and he had seen some of the data that we had. But now it's exponentially increased, especially all those objects. I was just in a meeting the other day discussing, recovery techniques and how to recover some of these things. And when I started really hearing some of those numbers, and now we're getting into the trillions, I about lost my brain because I'm thinking like, wow, we're going to have to really rethink how we recover these things. But it is part of the segment that we're in. And when I talked earlier about like how now cloud native has kind of influenced these things, because yeah, Kubernetes is a thing. I've been in that community since 2014, been through a few iterations from a previous job as well as my current role. And there's definitely a reason why. that people are jumping on board. It definitely enables developers to go forward. It also kind of provides a framework where a lot of the complaints that driven a lot of the change in DevOps, we see that Kubernetes is kind of like, it's very API centric. It gives the users and the operators a way that really allows you to feel like you're going friction-free as you're adopting those platforms. So, for us, here we are, have this current problem. Now all of a sudden we're starting to pivot, we're starting to change. It was no longer good enough to be in public cloud, but now we have to think about, all right, how do we enable these things? And then as the advertising industry has changed because of the technologies available, such as machine learning, we've also had to adapt and deal with some of these challenges. I think the recent ones for us over this summer was TensorFlow was one of the areas where now we're seeing a lot more use cases of it in our production workloads. And we're just guys that just kind of observe what's happening. The thing that we started noticing was happening is before in this bidding platform, everything tends to be north-south. You're going to just see packets come in, packets come out, decisions are made, immediately it's shot back out. And all of a sudden, over the summertime, we're noticing like, hey, look at the traffic patterns. Because of Kubernetes, because of some of the applications and how they're now talking to each other, east-west was such a thing. And it's one thing when you're in public cloud because, hey, you're going to get what you're going to get. But here we architect data centers with all these 100,000 cores that were really with a design that is going north-south. So we had to start really rethinking, like, well, first we're going to have to just expose what's happening here. So you can see where, for me, like the tensions of cloud native and the evolution of like supporting it is really becomes quite the challenge. So, just to kind of give you an idea of like some of the things that we use and how we have kind of evolved and where we're currently at, I kind of alluded to some of them. And it also speaks to some of our decision makings that we've had since I've been there. But we use a lot of the tools that a lot of us are familiar with. I think for us, like OpenStack has been a core part of our data center platform. What I love about it is that it just kind of gives us exactly what we need. And there's a lot to it. I think in 2017, I just started this job that I'm currently at, and it was a summit in Barcelona. And I think that was a summit where Mark Shuttleworth actually talked about stability of that platform. And we kind of knew it. We kind of were really at that point where we recognized, like, hey, it's all great, all these extra things in OpenStack, but all we really cared about was compute, network, and kind of storage. But those are the two big drivers, because we could have done a lot of what we're doing in AWS, and we do. But the one area that we couldn't do in a cost-effective way, as well as like meet the quality of services that I mentioned earlier, was that we couldn't do it really with the network type of instances that we need, or we had to really go back and spend and invest a lot of energy into optimizing our applications, which we do over time. But when you try to go to market quick, you're trying to really prove these things out, and you're prototyping, sometimes some of these things get left behind. And so for us, what we had to do is really, when we started looking at using OpenStack in the data center, we've been doing it for about like 6 years, is we really just focused on the things that fit our platform and our platform requirements. We've usually, like I said, we've been pulling from like Puppet repos. It's kind of been changing. Been talking with, like I've talked to the canonical teams here about, hey, I think maybe it's time we may pivot, because I think, like I said, there's some challenges in regards to sometimes open source communities and our ability to give back and support them. But we're still there. We're trying to support it. We want to keep it going. And then as well as like some of all the other tools that have really evolved, because, over the last 5 years, I mean, that's one of the benefits that we have gotten is, like I think we become more of a Hashi stack type of house, which has helped us tremendously in regards to automating our infrastructure, being able to stand up new zones that are needed if we start developing in certain regions. And then I think probably the bigger thing that started to kind of evolve for us is, kind of more adopting to more like a GitOps flow. I think we've always had this core, I would say CIOps was kind of our thing. And now we've kind of flown a little bit different, because a lot of our platforms are converging. Kubernetes is riding on top of OpenStack. We're also doing Kubernetes in AWS. But the area where I think we could have probably improved, and I know I've had this conversation, is sometimes as you go quick, you get tech debt. So I have that guy up top, which it's never fun to want to re-roll 150,000 cores and pull out your underlay, but I think at some point we probably are going to address it, because I think things like MAS make a lot of sense, and as well as that you get that community with it, and you get the innovations that come along with it. it's kind of tough. So I've kind of, if I had to say if I regretted one thing, I didn't do it sooner. And I know now I'm like, all right, 2020, guys, this is it. We got to kill this platform. We got one guy who wrote it, and he kind of pulled from one open source thing, and I'm like, that was a bad idea. But it's got us where we're at. It is the bedrock of what we do. And I think if I only had like to say one advice about like a lot of these things and what we've chosen, I would honestly just say that, we have to really think these things through. I know when you try to go quick and fast and you want to iterate and move forward, there's always a price to pay. And sometimes if you just look within these platforms themselves or these tools themselves, and I think like what Brendan was talking about, and I remember him talking about this at the Linux Plumbers Conference a few years ago, was like, oh, look, there's this great thing that could solve a problem that I'm doing it the hard way. And if I just kind of look internally at some of these things, you get the benefits. So if anything, I'm sometimes a slow guy and I have to kind of like think about these things, and I'm like, oh yeah, why am I doing it the hard way? And the same thing is with the TensorFlow problem that I talked about earlier. We spent like a month trying to diagnose a problem there, and then we were just like, I was like, hey guys, there's BPF. Like, have you guys looked at that? And everybody's like, no, let's not bother with it. And we did. I'm embarrassed to say we spent a month trying to fix this problem, and then we got the mic drop moment where we figured out, wait a minute, it's not us, it's the app. And it was like, boom, your problem. But look, here's the data, and here's how you can kind of fix these things yourselves. Those are the things that I would encourage as you kind of go through some of this, whatever tools you are, really exploit those tools. Like, we make a lot of these investments, don't waste those investments is really, I would have to say, is what I'm learning and still relearning myself. But I would say, to be honest, in my last two roles, what has allowed me to kind of like find ways to move forward, and what I try to really talk to my teams about is just to kind of like take a more leaner approach. I think, like I said, I used to say lean infrastructure. If you heard me in Adobe, you'll hear me say, this is what you got to do. Keep it simple. Like, don't make it any more difficult than you need to. Like, what are the business requirements around it? And then I kind of evolved a bit, and I always love that there's an article about building less software, and I've really grabbed onto that mantra of like, if I don't need it, as much as it excites me and I want that tool, we'll bake them a bit, we'll look at them, and don't get me wrong, we do a lot of R&D. We try to figure out, like, we're still chewing on the BPF thing. Like, we're trying to figure out, like, how do we get this in there? What's our ways that we can teach others? But that's kind of like my thing. What I tell my team is like, learn to draft off these individuals who are going out there and pioneering, and then let's give back. Let's like think of ways that we could share these things as well. And then the other piece that I really try to emphasize, and I think the OpenStack journey, as well as like Kubernetes, I think is something where we have to think about some of these things. And that is just like, how do you maintain the life cycle of these platforms that you're building? We want to make sure that you can confidently upgrade your things. And on the OpenStack side, we had quite a bit of challenge to get there. Part of it was what OpenStack was and how it had to make that journey to get upgradable somewhat. But then, all the other things that you have that you're building around, that you can confidently keep these things rolling forward so you don't accumulate too much debt along the way. And then the other thing I just tell my team is just be basic. I'm sure Stefan doesn't want me to sound it all out, so I won't. But just be basic in what you're trying to do, and it's okay. Especially with things like, Kubernetes, and now if you're in public cloud, I'd be like, hey, if you're in AWS, why not use the managed services if it makes sense for you, unless you have some good reason why. But then be careful. Think about like what it takes. We do kind of our own straight from upstream. I'd love to get myself to that point where we are not. There's a reasons or two why we're not doing it in AWS. And then OpenStack, we kind of have a lifespan on it, so we kind of decided that, you know what, for now we're going to just run, Kubernetes separately. But the cool thing is like if you're using Ubuntu, you get all these things kind of for free. So why not leverage those packages, those snaps, those things that can allow you to be able to, take these platforms and then run them and keep maintaining them? Because I think that was like the hardest thing over the last decade in cloud native and just cloud, is just making sure you stay current. Because I've stepped into a few environments where I see the maintenance and the health of some of these things are, still there. Even dirty secret, when I first joined this company and I saw EC2 Classic, I was like, geez, I want to get out of here. Like, what happened? How did you guys get on EC2 Classic, and why are you not off of it? And now we could say we're off of it, but that happens. You just get so busy, and then what happens? You just kind of live with it, and you don't get the net benefits. And that's the thing I think going forward with like Cloud Native Journey is, look at your tools. Make sure you can go forward. I think eventually, and this is what I try to really aspire, and this is more of like me as a manager and what I talk to like other engineering leaders and what we want to do. But I recognize like what my team does at the advertising cloud, and that's really that we want to build this stable platform. That's what we want. We want to give it to people that they can go off and do all this cool stuff, and really it's to benefit our customers. That's really what the net of why we're there. I keep preaching it to my team, and I think as you're kind of going in there and you're seeing now, hey, we're starting to adopt containers, which you should. I think there's a great use case, or you could, like I said, if it doesn't work for you, there's other things you could do as well, but make sure they're automated. So like bare metal we automate the heck out of it, but those are kind of like our artifacts of choice that we are currently using. But then you're going to get all this kind of thing of like, hey, there's all these great new things, and believe me, I'm right in there. I'm love what's going on with the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. I keep up. I'm always interested to kind of see what's developing in that community. But I think it's kind of funny because now we have like service meshes evolved, and it's become a thing. And I think when Jesse Frizzell was like talking about this, it's like 2017, and it was kind of a joke because everybody had somewhat slightly different definitions of what it was. Nowadays, I'm just more like, hey, Envoy, put a proxy in there. I get it. That makes sense to me. But what happens is you just get all this pressure. We're like, well, we got to have service mesh. We got to have Istio. We got to have all these other things without fully understanding or baking it in. And what I would tell everybody is just like, prototype early, prototype often. Figure out like, does that fit your use case of what you're trying to do? But the key thing is get whatever you are trying to solve, business problem you're trying to solve, get that up and running and get your users' feedback. And so I think that's the way you can really kind of like leverage what Cloud Native is today and all the tools that are coming out of it. I mean, definitely Prometheus, like that's just like a standard for us, and I think for a lot of us, because it just works. It's great. It scales. It gives us the insights that we need. So I would just say, have a pragmatic eye when you look at some of these things. Definitely dig in, do the R&D, and then just like I said, map it to what meets your business at where you're at. If you're not there, then it's great. It's okay. Hold off. But if you're there, just prototype early is really what I can suggest. I think Jessica Dean, she's amazing. If you don't follow her, you should. She's got some really good DevOps things. And as I said, you could substitute whatever on the right. Choose your abstractions wisely. Choose your tools wisely. What I'm really just trying to say is just, these things. We've been around this industry for quite a bit. Change is going to be normal. Like we got things like serverless that are really becoming a thing. We are going to have other things down the line that are going to be there. So whatever it is, just I think how she summed it up in her slide, does it add value or does it add unnecessary complexity? You have to weigh it out. Everybody's environment is going to be different. So as I mentioned, this is a Ubuntu Masters event, and I wanted to reel it back because they gave you some pragmatic advice of what I think, how we got where we are to scale where we're at. But why do we use Ubuntu? I'm fortunate enough to have the freeness of speech. I think I've worked with these gents quite a bit, and I've had very great interactions, and have always pitched me some great things. And I was talking to my team, and guys, why do we even use Ubuntu? I mean, there's this other company that has Linux, and one of the guys is like, it's what you see is what you get. Like that kernel that comes down, it's not polluted with all kinds of ways of packaging and all these other things. It just works. The innovation cycle, the dev cycle, that's the great stuff. Like we saw how quick and easy that you can go and you could take the BPF, get Brendan's book. Next thing you know, you're hacking away, doing some cool stuff. I mean, that's what's really powerful. And then for myself, like today, just seeing kind of like quick ways to spin up VMs, I'm like, I use Kind, but you know what? I was like, man, that's pretty cool. That's very, very exciting to see. I'm like, that's the first thing I want to do is I was like, I got to go home and load this up and see what's happening. And if I had to say, areas where we could probably do better in my specific space is obviously I talked about MAS, Snaps, LXD, to really exploit those things. So you got a lot already in there. Why not leverage it? So I think if I've had to give any takeaway, that's really what it is that sometimes we take this base building block, and I have a data center, you may be in public cloud, but guess what? We both have that same base building block. So exploit it, use it, build some imaging around it, and then just get the benefits of like a company that really is kind of innovating in that space. So the other piece I like about it is a community. I was joking because I saw one of my friends actually, he's had Kata in there. I love Kata containers. I don't know if everyone knows it, but hey, it solves a problem. A lot of K's in there. But it's kind of cool that they've just put all these new stuff right in there. So best thing we could do is get part of that community. And look, there's the resources like Launchpad, the Ubuntu community, and the best way you can be a part of it is like myself, is just trying to stay engaged, trying to give back. Some of these lessons learned, like sometimes they're not the things that are that exciting, or I share some things where we kind of didn't do well, but I'm hoping that other users can do well. But I just love that the community is really strong around it. So, you know, that's what I love about Ubuntu. So that's it. Thanks for listening to me.
It was a great talk, and I wasn't disappointed in your title at all. Just to clarify, this was perfectly fine. Do we have any questions in the audience? And if we do, then there's mics going around.
Do you use landscape, or what do you use for patch management and security of your Ubuntu images?
So we're Adobe now. We're acquired, so we kind of have internal. We have to manage our own dependency and packaging internally. If I was probably in a different environment, I would think it's a very viable way to manage things, especially because like I've come from previous smaller companies where we didn't manage some of these things, sadly, or we didn't leverage those things, and I think you should. The front.
I was curious about the P95 and the 50 milliseconds.
In regards to like this.
Is that the entire life cycle of the request and service? Or
Yes. Unfortunately, it's tough. Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, we're actually, you know, obviously CDNs, things like that, where we can cache certain things. Like areas like search are pretty easy because like we do get a lot of like common things. You know, region is the big challenge. You know, so we definitely have to figure out like what markets that we're in and what we're doing there. And I think, like I said, depends on the customer too as well. Like there's certain customers, obviously, you're gonna not everybody gets that, but I would say the customers that we really try to focus and build around, it's around that measure.